Like the
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, that's
start. I will start with the technology. The committee is now in session. The Science and Technology Committee is meeting in the West Midlands today at the Manufacturing Technology Centre to consider the particular role and strengths and opportunities that the West Midlands has in helping us recover from COVID. We have witnesses from the region and we're very pleased to be the guests of the Manufacturing Technology Centre, and Dr. Clive Hickman, its Chief Executive, is one of our witnesses this morning. I'd like to start formally by declaring a non-financial interest, since we're in the West Midlands, that I chair an informal group of Friends of the Warwick Manufacturing Group of the University of Warwick, which is voluntary and unremunerated. I don't know other members notify me of any other interest to declare, in which case we can proceed with our first panel of witnesses. We're very pleased to welcome Andy Street, who is the Mayor of the West Midlands. Thank you very much indeed for coming, Andy. Dr. Clive Hickman, who I said is the Chief Executive of the Manufacturing Technology Centre. We're grateful for the tour of the magnificent facility and the opportunity to meet your colleagues here and to learn about the work that you do. And Professor Simon Collinson, who is Director of the City Region Economic Development Institute at the University of Birmingham. Thank you very much indeed for coming. I'm going to turn first to Zara Sultana, just since it was Zara's suggestion that we come to the MTC, just to perhaps say a bit of context as to why she suggested that we're here.
Since joining the Science and Tech,
can you just press the button?
Yes. You think I'd know by now. Since joining the Science and Tech Select Committee, one of the things that we're all very passionate about is going into our regions and looking at the companies that are doing the work on the ground, talking to those world leaders in their fields. And I'd visited MTC only a couple of weeks ago, so I was really proud to propose that we have our kind of fact-finding on-the-ground visit here, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I've seen things I didn't see on the previous tour, so I'm just incredibly grateful to Dr. Hickman's team for facilitating this, and yeah, hopefully we'll be back in Coventry again very soon for another session.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Zara. Let's kick off, and perhaps I can turn to the Mayor first to summarise what you see as the opportunities that arise from science and technology in the West Midlands in the years ahead, and, if you will, what we need to do collectively to make sure we avail ourselves of those opportunities.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and perhaps I can first of all just thank you for coming to the West Midlands to do this piece of inquiry, I think is the correct word for it. So I guess I would just want to say two things by way of introduction. The first, of course, is that you're coming to a region that has some incredible strengths, and the second will be, but we're not doing well enough at drawing in some public funding to support those strengths, if I can do that. So the starting point is probably to say, though, that this region has for a number of years now focused on an economic plan. We called it, under your time in Bays, our local industrial strategy, and we very much tried to concentrate our R&D activities under the sectors that were leading that strategy. And of course, what we are famous for, and it was indeed the leading cluster in the work we did to research the local industrial strategy, is of course the automotive sector, and we do of course have some incredible institutional strengths: the Manufacturing Technology, the Manufacturing Technology Centre, the Warwick Manufacturing Group, and of course all of the individual businesses that invest, and we'll come on to see the results of that in a moment. We also, though, are diversifying our economy, and we're doing a current piece of work on how we recover from the pandemic that we call our Plan for Growth, and we're looking at the other clusters where we believe that we can lead in the future. So of course the electrification of the automotive sector is absolutely critical, and there's a whole piece about how businesses transition there. We've also got strength in logistics and distribution, in the med tech and health tech sectors, and of course our biggest employer in the region is of course the professional services sector, and we're seeing technology change how that operates as well. And critically, the fastest growing sector for us is the green manufacturing sector, so the whole challenges around net zero, we believe we've got a real strength to interplay there that we might explore a little later on. If you actually look at what then is being invested behind R&D in the region, I've put around a simple chart which shows a very, I think, unusual position. So what this chart does, and it's produced recent data by Nesta, it shows for each region of the country the investment that is coming from the business sector, so private sector investment on the left-hand axis, and then on the bottom axis, the public sector investment. And you will see that in terms of private business investment, we're in a really good position behind only the East of England and the South East, and that of course is very much dominated by the Cambridge area, the East of England performance in their sectors. And our industrial sectors are what really lead that good performance. We're very concentrated in a relatively small number of industrial sectors, which is arguably a strength because it means the quality is really good, but it's arguably a weakness in that we haven't got the diversified economy that we might like to get to. But the most telling thing is despite private sector businesses pouring in investment into R&D, we are the lowest performing region in the country in terms of the public sector contribution to R&D. And if you did a ratio between the two, we've got the greatest ratio of anywhere in the country. So £4 of private investment for £1 of public investment. So the question I think I'd encourage the committee to think about is why is it that public funding is not getting behind the clear decisions of private investors. We're very conscious of this question ourselves, and we're thinking through our own structures, the Innovation Board, the Combined Authority set up, all of the institutional structures, what more we need to do. But the honest truth is that thus far we found that position on that graph difficult to move. And my contention would be that that cannot be the right position for this region to have, and we do need to ask ourselves what needs to happen with government and all the institutions of government to shift that position for the benefit of the UK overall.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's very clear, and we will publish the chart that you mentioned on the committee's website for anyone tuning in. Perhaps I can turn to Professor Collinson. You've heard the analysis from the Mayor there as to the relative investment from the public sector, very strong performance from the private sector. Based on your analysis across the whole region over many years, is that a picture that you recognise and agree with? And if so, what are the causes of that? Do you have any insight into that?
Thank you. Yes, thanks very much. No, it's an accurate picture. We have about £83 per capita in public R&D spend against just over 400 in private investment. So it's a really attractive region for private investors in R&D, and there's really quite excellent multiplier effects from that investment in R&D. I mean, there are a number of reasons for this, and we've done very well for a brief period of time in Innovate UK funding, which is a particular stream of funding to regions, particularly around catapults. We had about 14% of national funding in Innovate UK for a brief period in 2018 to 2019. That's gone down to 7.7% in the last set of figures. So there are sort of peaks and troughs in the flows of public R&D money, but over the 5 years to 7 years that we've mapped this, it's the lowest region for this. So there are a number of issues. One is, I think everyone knows there's a concentration of public R&D funding in the south and southeast and the Golden Triangle. About half public R&D goes into that area. This is good for the country. We need to be global leaders in science and technology and be at the forefront of science and technology. But you could argue that there's a slightly blinkered view about what regions like the West Midlands have to offer and what would be the opportunities in terms of beneficial outcomes if further R&D funding was put into regions. And it's blinkered in a number of ways. Number one is we tend to be characterised correctly as the Centre for Automotive and Advanced Manufacturing. We're absolutely excellent at that. We have a higher number and a range of top-class R&D intensive firms and excellent connections with not just universities directly, but via intermediaries, and these intermediaries are superbly important. So the AMTC, WMG, the ITM in life sciences, and Tyseley Energy Centre for the energy field. These are translators of pure R&D into what firms need, applied technology and commercialization, but they're also skills developers. And one of the things we need to do is connect skills very explicitly and upskilling to flows of R&D into regions, and these intermediaries do that very well, and I can come back to that. So the first thing is we are characterised as a very narrow offer in terms of our science and technology area, and it's correct that we're very good at that area, but we have actually a very strong critical mass in several other areas. One of these is clean technology and energy, and we've done analysis across different regions, and we have an advantage in skills supply, but also in technology development in those areas. And then secondly, life sciences, and again, that's a hidden, sort of latent competitive advantage for the region, which further I think investment would unlock with, again, strong multipliers to regional strengths in firms. And I think it's important to connect those two things. It's about supply side of science and technology and demand side.
Thank you very much indeed. Before I come to Zara and Carol, just to kind of push a bit further on the causes of the relative underperformance of the West Midlands in terms of public funding. What you describe, Professor Collinson, is disciplines with an applied orientation, if I might describe it that way. Is the relative disparity because the funding is going less to the applied disciplines, or those parts of disciplines that are applied, and more to the more kind of theoretical and abstract? Does that cause the disparity, or is it about, is there a kind of gravitational pull of some of the particular institutions in other areas? The Mayor mentioned Cambridge, the East of England being driven by Cambridge. Is it that? Is it the institutions in other areas? Or is it, as it were, the kind of the ecology of who makes decisions? Are you less represented on the key committees? What drives this distribution?
It's an excellent question. It's a complex set of factors, and I think there are institutional structural issues with how funding is allocated, I'd suggest. I think in particular, though, if you look at the differentiation between Research England funding, Innovate UK funding and the catapults versus the research councils, you do see a relatively low hit rate, particularly for the region in EPSRC and MRC. There's two research councils which have the largest funding budget. So we punch above our weight in research councils that spend lower amounts and small amounts of funding, and we punch well below our weight in those, and this is the pure end of science and technology and R&D if you look at the research councils. So we have done well in the applied area in the Innovate UK and the catapults area, but that was relatively temporary actually, and it was focused on one area. We have done relatively badly in those high-end areas, and you could argue the cluster of universities is not as strong as in the northwest, and certainly not the London and the southeast. Or you could argue, that there is some issue with the way that we're bidding for funding, because the award rate per bid from our region and the collective universities in the West Midlands is a lower hit rate than from other regions, and we're trying to investigate precisely what's underlying that. It's a good question, though.
Thank you. Zara Sultana, then Carol Monaghan.
One day I'll get it right. Do you think that the COVID situation in particular allows the region an opportunity for economic growth, and are there particular local assets that can be utilised for that? Yes, in a nutshell. I mean, the COVID impact and, frankly, Brexit, and we've tracked these two economic shocks on the region, both of them hit this region exceptionally hard. For a start, we have a very sort of low income, low skills and high deprivation population, so low household income and low skills. And so the starting point wasn't good. Secondly, we have a high quotient of manufacturing firms in the region who were hit hard by Brexit and subsequently COVID, and now with logistics and supply chains. So recovery is more of a challenge for the region. But going into your second question, we have, some people use the term pivot. I think we've seen the agility in the region to shift a number of assets, and I think in particular R&D centres and medical schools and universities and beyond, to actually face the challenges of the pandemic really quite effectively, from anything from making masks to testing facilities on campus to
what we do in my institute, which is using our analytics to track where the impact of the COVID is happening, what the knock-on effect to households is, and what the knock-on effect to businesses are, including furlough rates. And we report every 2 weeks to the economic impact group that's chaired by the mayor. So I think, when you look at particularly the life sciences and the healthcare infrastructure in the region, and you see the ability of this and other regions to shift direction and focus resources and assets into coping, I think it's an exemplar. I mean, I think it's been actually spectacular in terms of the adaptability of the region. But we have a long way to go in recovery, and I would urge that further investment in life sciences and the healthcare infrastructure at the local level, because of the ability of regions like ours to adapt when you can act locally with local resources, I would urge the institutional infrastructure and the R&D to be thought of together when we think about these things in future response needs to shocks like that. Yeah.
And building on that, Andy, what local strengths within the region are being prioritised in that COVID recovery?
I'm going to broaden the question a touch, because we're trying not just to think about a COVID recovery, we're trying to think about a full economic recovery and what underlying trends have changed as well in our recovery. So I think you have to take the net zero piece alongside the COVID recovery. So let me pull out 3 things we're trying to do in 3 different sectors. And it very much links to where Simon was talking about building institutional strength that will enable us to take a greater share of public R&D. So the first, of course, is to actually build our strength in the life sciences sector. And so we've worked hard for a number of years to actually get off the ground the private sector investment from Bruntwood with Birmingham University to build that research-intensive life sciences park in South Birmingham. And we're also proposing something similar around the HS2 interchange station in Solihull. So very much trying to increase our share of that growing market and use the collaboration with the university to do that. The second area that we're obviously thinking is, of course, as we move towards net zero, we're thinking about the electrification of the automotive industry. That is both an opportunity and, frankly, is defending our peace. And if you ask me what the single biggest priority is, which I know you are extremely familiar with, it is, of course, to win the battery factory in South Coventry, and again playing to the institutional piece. And it seems strange to be reporting this to a committee chaired by Greg Clark, as he was the Secretary of State who brought this about, was to actually win, of course, the Battery Industrialisation Centre in South Coventry as well. Exactly the same thinking. What is the institutional strength that will then grow the private sector contribution? But that's, I would probably say, number 1 priority. And then the third one I would pull out is very much this whole question of the decarbonisation of both our industry and indeed our housing stock, and the institutional bid that we've put together and thus far have been unsuccessful. Clive Hickman actually was the author of it, is what we call the National Centre for the Decarbonisation of Heat, very much to be alongside the facility at Tyseley that Simon referred to. So again, you see the principle. We're trying to learn from what we've done in automotive, where those institutions draw in investment to build that capability in other areas.
Thank you. And if I just have an opportunity to follow up on the point around the gigafactory in South Coventry, I'm just wondering what representations, if any, have you made to reports that the Transport Secretary has been actively lobbying against Coventry Airport being used as a gigafactory?
So yes, it was in the Sunday Times. We've not had any confirmation that that has been done, but we continue to make our case at the most senior level in government. Literally, the Prime Minister and I had a conversation only a few days about it, so we're going to press on all of those positive aspects of why the case should be made, rather than engaging, frankly, in what was some rumour, I would probably describe it as.
Moving on to Dr. Hickman, do you have anything to add to looking at the kind of the local strengths of the region in this economic recovery?
Yes, I'd like to sort of first go back to some of the things that Andy and Simon have said, talking about why we don't get the government funding into the Midlands. I really don't know why we don't do that, but what I do know is that the Midlands is really good at attracting inward investment here. So just on this site at Anstey, since 2012, we've secured £800 million worth of inward investment of companies coming onto the site here. That excludes the investment that's been made in MTC, and it's generated over 2,000 jobs on this business park. So the catapults are actually a magnet for attracting inward investment. We need to find out how we can use that magnet to attract the government investment. And the second point that was talked about was the balance between R&D. And yes, there is an imbalance. There's a lot more money invested in R than there is in D. We need to get that balance right, but I would urge that if we get it right, it isn't by reducing R, it's by increasing D. Sort of moving on, how can we pull more of the government investment into the Midlands? I think that ARIA is probably a strong opportunity for us. We're already making a case that says the Midlands, the West Midlands, is absolutely the ideal location for the new ARIA programme when it actually comes into existence. If we can bring that here into the Midlands, I think that will have a really strong opportunity to pull more inward investment and also to pull more government investment into the Midlands region.
Thank you, Dr. Hickman. And what role is the recently formed Midlands Engine Business Council playing in the region's recovery?
I think that Andy would probably be a better person to answer that than me.
Sure.
I think as yet relatively little, if I'm honest. That doesn't mean it's a poor thing to do, it's the right thing to do. The idea of it was very much that a number of senior leaders from business would be able to speak directly to the Secretary of State, then Robert Jenrick, in his role as the Midlands Engine Champion. It was a sound idea, but I think it would be difficult to say that it has actually drawn up any strategy as yet. And perhaps it's worth just being really clear. The economic strategy for the West Midlands is distinct to the East Midlands, and I think it would be accepted that it is the combined authority that really leads on that, drawing in input from all of our partner organisations, but we very much see that as our primary responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zara. Carol Monaghan, then Erin Bell.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a whole pile of questions here that have arisen since just hearing what people are saying. Maybe I could start with Dr. Hickman. You're talking about increasing D, and I think pretty much every member of the committee would support you in that. Do you think we should be more prescriptive about percentage or amount of D spending in terms of public spending? Because at the moment it seems to be just a bunch of money that is distributed.
I think that when you look at the investment in a new product or a new technology, the research element is about 1/10 of the total cost that needs to go into that complete programme. So 1/10 of the investment is in the R and 9/10 are in the D. Now, it doesn't need government to put the 9/10 into D, but it does need the government working in parallel with industry to try to support that D. So right now we're seeing, I suspect in the Midlands, that most of the D is coming from industry and very little is coming from government. And that's where the balance needs to come back. But I don't know whether you can be prescriptive and say 50% of it should be in R and 50% is in D, because it will vary depending on the product that you're working on or the technology that you're working on. So I would prefer not to be prescriptive. I would like to see the 2.5% in R&D pulled forward rather than slipping out as we've seen in the CSR.
And if I can also ask you about your comments about ARIA. Now, it's quite interesting you talk about ARIA being based here, but of course ARIA is something that is open to bids from across the UK. I'm interested, do you see that if there were money coming from ARIA to this area, that it would pull in, because the ARIA money isn't that much in terms of the entire science budget. Do you see it then being able to unlock other public funding that might come in off the back of it?
I think it would unlock a lot more private sector funding rather than necessarily public funding. I think that despite it being a small amount of money, it's still more than the money that we get totally into the West Midlands region right now. So it is a big number in real terms. Having it located in the Midlands doesn't mean that all of that money would be spent in the Midlands. You're absolutely right that it would be across the UK. But I think with it being in the Midlands, it would again become that attractive magnet for more inward investment into the region.
But it's not changing, because we've already heard from Andy this afternoon about the tiny amount of funding, public funding, that comes to West Midlands. That's not going to necessarily change as a result of that. You've talked about it unlocking private sector.
Yeah.
Sorry, Andy, you want to come in this?
If I just contribute on that, because I actually think it could change our public funding performance as well, in actually 3 ways. One of the questions the chair asked to Simon was, is there something about who's in these bodies, and it's sort of, is there a good enough understanding of what we do here? And I think if there was a presence, that understanding would naturally improve. There has to be as well a link between ARIA and the other research funding bodies that are public research bodies, and it's those outcomes that we need to change. And of course the third link is between that organisation and the institutions of government that drive inward investment as well. And let's just be clear, there we have an extremely good record. We've been by some way for the last 5 years the best region outside London. So it's a strength on which we can build for UK PLC. And again, it's this irony of brilliance in some areas, but relative weakness in others, that I think we see decisions like that would actually try to rebalance that.
Can I maybe then just ask you another question? I mean, we've talked about the importance of bringing in additional public funding. Have you any sense of what the benefits would be? I mean, are we talking about capability benefits? Are we talking about economic benefits? Is it both? What sort of ideas would you have?
I'll be brief, but Simon's the economist in the room, so I'll let him answer. But no, let's just be clear. There are, again, 3 things very quickly. Of course it has an economic benefit, there's absolutely no question, and you can do the maths on that. Secondarily, though, it's about the strengthening of some of our latent sectors. So the theme that goes through this is, yes, we've had for 40 years some outstanding, successful areas, but they are not broad enough. So what we're trying to do is build our life sciences capability. We're trying to build our capability in the energy storage and distribution. We're trying to build our capability in fintech. And in a sense, the word translational that was used earlier on is so important, because that's actually what gives us that sort of step up. So that's the advantage we're trying to draw out of this. And frankly, the advantage is the levelling upward. It's about broadening and more the country and moving away from what I believe is an over-dependence on one area of the country. So those are the 3 advantages I see.
Thank you. Thank you. Simon.
Yeah, if I may, thanks. It's a really good question. It connects to the ARIA question in a sense. I mean, there are several direct benefits that come from attracting R&D intensive firms or public sector R&D. The first and foremost is it tends to attract higher income, higher skilled individuals. So the first thing is your average GVA per capita, per head, your productivity numbers go up, and in very science and technology intensive labs in either advanced automotive or life sciences, you can literally double your average GVA per person. This is the first good thing. The second good thing is that it can have a cluster effect, agglomeration effect. A world-leading centre can attract foreign direct investment and investment from other parts of the region. And again, you bring in additional higher than average skilled individuals, which have higher income. Those trigger really good multiplier effects. So the secondary employment, the indirect employment effects are very good because they have high spending power. There are two pitfalls here we need to be aware of. First of all, R&D investment in some contexts actually has negative displacement effects. The trade-off for governments at the regional level is quite difficult. We need to grow both productivity and the scale and size of the economies as well as the efficiency, but we have to grow, we have to reduce inequality, reduce deprivation. So inclusivity and then sustainability. There are three kind of growth poles or pathways, and in a sense there are trade-offs here. Displacement effects from some R&D investment means you increase house prices and increase costs, and you displace low-income, low-skilled individuals from the centres where the employment is, and it can have a negative effect on equality. And the thing tying this together, there are two things. One is skills. If the investment comes with a budget for upskilling, and again, this is the kind of thing that MTC and WMG and other places do, upskilling enables less skilled people to benefit from that catalyst, that investment. The second dimensions to this, I mean, skills really bridges household income and productivity. The second dimension, is to do with the alignment between the R&D you're investing in. And I'm not really clear what ARIA is, so if somebody explains what it might be, I'll be able to judge this.
We're trying to work that out ourselves.
Brilliant. But what we know from our studies of different regions globally in the UK, there is alignment or misalignment between R&D centres, including universities, and what is in demand from local firms in terms of innovation. Alignment means there is a really good flow through and a commercialisation. And again, intermediaries help with that. Misalignment means universities are there, but they don't touch the sides. They have no real impact except those direct employer impacts on their region. And that alignment question is really important to try and improve in the regions in the UK.
Thank you. Chair, do I have time for one more? Thank you. Thank you. Given that, and this is, I think, Andy might be best placed to answer this. So given that the West Midlands is a particularly business-led and innovation type area, what impact has the pandemic had on this? And do you see the West Midlands as being particularly vulnerable in this area?
I mean, I think Simon said earlier on, we've been the worst hit of any region in the country in terms of the reduction in GDP for the year 2020. It wasn't a surprise because it's what was predicted before the pandemic developed by all economists, and it was simply a reflection of the sectoral composition of the West Midlands economy. And this is a simple way of describing it, but people just think, oh yes, I get what he means when I say this. If you think of the business tourism sector, where we had over 50% market share, it's been closed for 15 months, so disappeared. So that categorically has more impact here than anywhere else. Tourism is returning, but not business tourism. And so that's what happened. Now, the particular point, though, that drives this graph, the other thing that has happened is business investment has also been cut substantially. You will have had all this data, I'm sure, at other committees. It is coming back now, and it's difficult to predict this, but I don't see anything that says it will come back less strongly in this region than anywhere else. But because we are particularly driven by business investment, not by public investment, that reduction has had a greater impact on our GDP than if we had the opposite of this graph. That point you're drawing out is correct.
Is there any way to build more resilience into the area?
This is the point about building the clusters that have the highest potential. So the work that we're doing at the moment is slightly different to the local industrial strategy work, because the local industrial strategy work was very much, what are your outstanding sectors? How are you going to grow them? And we did that well, and that wasn't wrong, and it remains the right thing to do, to double down on those. But the new work has an additional element, which is, and which could be, the sectors of strength in the future, because that will build resilience, and that's why we've got to use public investment, behind building the institutional capability in those sectors as well as the private investment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Carol. So Aaron Bell and then Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming. Continuing with the graph that you brought us, Andy, I mean, obviously as a West Midlands MP, I'm not going to argue against more public money coming in, but say we got that double from where we are at the moment, do you think, how much more private investment would that leverage? I mean, it's not going to maintain the current ratio we've got, which is the highest in the country, is it?
No, of course it's not. But I think a very big question is which sectors does that come in? Because if you look at our private investment, it's also very concentrated in certain sectors. So in a sense, being unimaginative in answering this question, because making the same point again, we have got to, for the resilience issue, to increase our private investment in complementary sectors. And one of the ways of doing that is building the public structures as well. But I might just ask Simon if he wants to comment on that, because I think that's a good...
It is a good question. I don't think the ratio will be the same, no. I think it's an opportunity to expand the portfolio of strengths in the region. I think that's really important. What we've discovered, I think, is that there are latent or nascent competitive advantages in the assets and capabilities we've got in the region. There's scale, but there's also a level of specialisation. And out of an excellent legacy of automotive advanced manufacturing, we have really superb capabilities in space. Now, you wouldn't know that if you looked at SIC codes or firms. You would only see it if you really did a fairly good diagnostic on the assets and capabilities and skills that are held within automotive and the contractors that work with automotive. So by bringing public sector R&D to, again, pivot, to shift some of that manufacturing focus onto either creative and or space and or, for example, life sciences, where some of those skills are really needed, and use those skills to boost those areas, we're almost bringing about an accelerated shift to new areas and emerging industries, and that's where public money can be catalytic. It would again attract different kinds of private sector investment in R&D, one would hope, in those new areas, and that's what we desperately need.
Thank you, Professor Collinson. And I mean, so again, sort of turning it on its head slightly, does this region could it serve as a model for other regions in terms of how you can leverage more private investment into R&D? Are other regions interested in why we are doing so well with private investment? Either to Andy or Professor Collinson?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, they're not beating it past your door.
No.
Well, I think you've got to switch the question round a bit. I mean, it's normal that public sector R&D investments are used to leverage and attract private. We've done very well without it, and the question is how much more would we manage to do with it? Yep. No, but I don't think we're an exemplar in that sense. I mean, we do very well in foreign direct investment and traditionally exports, but again in a narrow set of sectors, and we need to grow that portfolio to improve the regional resilience.
Okay. Dr. Hickman, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I think we've got a ticking time bomb if we're not careful.
Okay.
And we've had all of this private sector investment, a lot of it coming into the auto sector, but we need to recognise that we've got 42,330 people employed in companies making vehicles with internal combustion engines. So those 43,000 people's jobs are at risk at the minute, and they're at risk because of the net zero strategy to move towards electric vehicles. We have to do something to reskill those individuals, to be able to train them to do other things for the future, so it's reskilling and upskilling. Now that money is not necessarily going to come from the private sector, and that's where we need help from the public sector to kickstart that work so we can get these people back in employment in the future, or keep them in employment, so that we don't have a crisis in 10 years' time.
Thank you. I was going to come to you anyway. I mean, I'm obviously struck by the tour that we just had, and Ken Young and Richard Watkins telling us about the point you made earlier, the difference between R&D and the difficulty in getting particularly SMEs to adopt some of the things that you are, some of the amazing things you're doing here. How do we, what are the barriers to commercialisation of research in this region, and how do we overcome them, and how do we make SMEs more aware of what you offer here at the MTC?
We use a large chunk of our catapult funding to support SMEs, to be able to engage with them, to show them what the capabilities are. And for every SME that we've worked with, we've been able to introduce advanced manufacturing technologies that have displaced people from their current job. But along with that, we've provided upskilling and reskilling to those people, which has allowed them to take on better paid, cleaner, safer jobs for the future. The problem is the amount of funding that we have to do that is too small. So whilst we're being successful with the companies that we work with, it's the tip of the iceberg. To have a real societal impact, we need to be able to invest a lot more money in that activity. Now, the Mate Smarter programme is important for that. That was led by Jürgen Meyer. We've got a good proportion of money from that into the West Midlands, but it's still not enough to be able to get to where we need to be to retrain all of these 43,000 people in order to be able to move those companies and pivot those companies into different sectors and to different products for the future.
Okay, thank you. And just on the ARIA point, because you raised it earlier, I mean, obviously ARIA is going to be a funder of projects. Do you think that you have potential, the real bleeding edge projects? Do you think you have potential projects that you're hosting here at the MTC that would be looking to bid into ARIA, as well as the idea that we might want to host ARIA itself in the West Midlands?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There are a number of...
Your mic, I think.
That's absolutely true. There's a number of products that are sitting in there right now with SMEs where we're looking to get investment from the venture capitalists and from the investment market to bring them to the marketplace. If ARIA was in place and we were able to leverage that, I think leveraging ARIA money with the venture capitalist money would really be game changing to get some of those unicorn businesses forming.
Yeah, there's some interesting funding models envisaged for ARIA as well. And finally, if I could turn back to Andy Street about government relations and so on. What challenges has the pandemic posed for the relations between local and national government in your experience?
Been some strengths, been some weaknesses actually. I think the question is not particularly around R&D and innovation, no. Is it? Or are you looking
well,
at
I mean, in terms of what you're seeking to do with the recovery, have you had some challenges around that because of the stresses of the pandemic?
No, we haven't. Actually, that would be wrong. I mean, the tensions with government during the pandemic were over material that had been covered very broadly, which is the whole question of the tendency towards centralisation and our view that some things could be better be done regionally or locally. But in terms of the plan for the recovery, I would not say there has been a particular stress from this. I would say we have struggled to really get a hearing of the quality that we've had today on this point I keep making, the irony of our situation. So it's been good that you've looked at this in detail. If I can make one other point, though, that talks to what Clive referred to, I think the scale of the challenge in the change for the automotive industry is vast. Whether that is truly understood by policymakers, I am not sure. I'll just give you the stat, which I think illustrates this. JLR's commitment in terms of investment behind their net zero work is £2.5 billion a year. It is an eye-watering sum of money. But that's what they believe they have to put in to achieve the government's target of zero sales of ICEs by 2030 and hybrids by 2035, and maintaining the sort of volume they need to employ the sort of number of people. And then the public policy support for that is particularly through the tier 2 supply chain companies. There are huge issues, and we're seeing real pain with some of them not being able to make that transition. So I think it's not a direct recovery from COVID answer, but it is an answer about the transition that we've set out upon and the vast scale of challenge that change involves.
Thank you. And finally, just to be a little parochial, you've done a superb job banging the drum for the West Midlands Combined Authority, but the West Midlands is obviously wider than the area that you cover, and I represent North Staffordshire.
Of course.
We've got a couple of excellent businesses coming to give us evidence later today.
Yes.
How do we make sure the wider West Midlands gets the benefits of the work that you're doing here in the Combined Authority?
Well, I could say that Staffordshire does very well banging its own drum, is my perception, and your MPs for Stoke certainly do extremely well. And actually, you have done relatively well in some of the Innovate public funding pieces. You've done better, actually, than the area that we three all come from. But I still, I hope, though, what's come out from this today is we are trying to think about the genuine strengths of the region across the piece. So, for example, when we met with government ministers, the ceramics industry was part of the story for exactly the reason that you're implying.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you, Aaron. Just before I turn to Rebecca Long-Bailey, perhaps I could just follow up Aaron's question to Dr. Hickman. We've had the privilege of a tour of the Manufacturing Technology Centre this morning, and you had an exchange about projects that you're working on that might attract interest. For people that are tuning in from outside this room that haven't had the tour, just give us an example of one of the projects that is current and that you might benefit from a kind of wider knowledge of.
I'll give you one that you probably didn't see this morning to try and widen the scope of what we do. So we've been working in laser processing for the last 10 years here at MTC and looking at how we can use lasers to develop better solutions to problems. And we were approached by one of the large food companies, I won't say the name on film, and they asked us if we could help them with ice cream manufacture. And the problem that they have is that when they're making the ice cream, they need to clean the plates every 2 hours because the plates clog with ice cream. That ice cream gets wasted. There's time wasted in cleaning the plates. What could we do? So we came up with a solution that was laser etching the plates. So now they only have to clean the plates once every shift. Now that technology we've then used onto bearing surfaces. How can we improve the quality of bearing surfaces so you reduce the friction? That's worked successfully. We're looking at how we can apply that now to shipbuilding, and if we can use the same technology on the hulls of ships, improve the hydrodynamics, reduce the fuel consumption, the energy consumption of a ship. Now we're about to launch that as a company into the marketplace. That really does have the capability of being a unicorn business within 10 years.
Thank you. That's a great illustration of some, I think, an important point. We've been talking quite a bit about sectors, and the Mayor has talked about sectors that have potential to grow. But actually, a lot of what we see here are cross-cutting innovations that can be taken from one sector and applied to a wholly different one. And we ought not to lose sight of that as an important contribution to future growth.
Yeah, and from our perspective, we have always said that we're sector agnostic. We're looking at technologies and how we can translate them from one area to another area. Automation is a classic one, how we can move that into different sectors. But we're also now working on looking at how we can use modern methods of construction, manufacture to be modern methods of construction. And I think you saw this morning some of the things that we're doing on construction that are going to be game-changing for the industry in the future.
Thank you very much indeed. I've piqued the interest in my question to you of Carol Monaghan, so I'll bring her in briefly.
Thanks very much. I'm just the ice cream has got me excited, but I'm just wondering, how would a business like that know to come to you and seek that help, and what sort of relationship, what sort of transactional relationship then would you have with that business?
So we have our own business development team. We do promote ourselves in the media, but one of the big sources for us are the banks. So the banks have lots of business managers who are working with small and large companies. So we have a strong relationship with all of the regional banks. We work with them. The building that we're in today is partially funded by Lloyds Bank to improve the apprentice training capability for the region. But the banks bring their customers to us who've got a problem. So So someone will go to see their bank manager, they may need some funding for something. The bank manager will come to us to say, is there anything you can do that avoids the need for this level of investment? And very often we can look at a company and we can give them product improvement opportunities that improve their productivity by just changing the way they develop a product, the way they deliver a product. That means it can save them on investment. And that's a real strength of what we do here at MTC.
And would they need to pay you for that, or is that just a...
When it's a large company, then they have to pay commercial rates. It's a part of the Catapult programme that if we do work directly with industry, it has to be at commercial rates, because we don't want to be in a position where we would be undermining other people who might be able to do that in a commercial environment. With the SMEs, we are able to use some of our Catapult funding to support a programme with an SME. So an SME would come to us with, say, a £20,000 project that's valued at £20,000. We can deliver that for £10,000, where we supplement it with £10,000 on a de minimis basis, so we don't breach any state aid rules. And then that SME can then use that project for R&D tax credits, which reduces his £10,000 further.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carol. And finally, Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Strategy set out to revolutionise manufacturing and bring it in line with other countries such as Germany, who are way ahead in terms of advanced manufacturing. But my question is do you think the government is supporting the Made Smarter strategy to the extent that it should be? And if not, what would you like to see happen next? And we'll start firstly with Dr. Hickman.
Well, the simple answer to that is no. We would like to have a lot more funding. We did ask for a lot more funding through the Made Smarter programme. But the longer answer and the genuine answer is that the level of support that we're getting from the government is helping us to make a difference. So whilst it may not be adequate, it's certainly setting us on the right path to getting this implemented for the future. And digital manufacturing that we talk about in the Made Smarter, it's all about trying to make a bespoke product at the same price point and at the same quality that you make a mass-produced product. And if we can do that for our SME community, it has game-changing impact on their productivity. And we've already seen a number of companies that have been able to increase their turnover, increase their market share, and particularly increase their exports through the Made Smarter programme.
Andy.
It's a great programme. I've visited some of the companies that are taking part in it across the West Midlands, and it is very clear that there is a business case behind doing it at greater scale. Another programme that the government has put a little bit of money on the table for is the whole decarbonisation of industrial clusters that we're leading in the Black Country. Another really good example where it's small pilot scale at the moment. What I feel we've got to do is make the case for growing the scale of that by showing the individual improvement for individual companies.
Great, thank you. And Professor Collinson.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a great programme too, and I think what it also has undergone is a bit of an evaluation, and that evaluation shows that the outcomes are really positive, and we could apply those evaluations and apply a bit more precision and intelligence on other kinds of investments and interventions. That one in particular has affected a small proportion of the SMEs in the region, just as Clive said. And scaling it up and focusing it a bit more precisely could really, really snowball that impact. The problem with the region is we have a very long tail of low productive small firms. They have not invested over quite a long time in either skills or capital. The dilemma is if you invest in capital and automation, you don't employ as many people. So that, on top of Clive's comments about the transition to net zero automotive, McKinsey reckons there'll be a 40% decline in manufacturing employment by 2040. 40% decline. So this idea of transitioning and pivoting and assisting firms to move into other areas, digital is going to grow at 20%. But again, according to McKinsey's data, we're about 500,000 short of digital skills by 2030. So you've got to connect both skills and the interventions to the places and the firms and sectors or cross-sector, the places that need it most, I think.
Thank you. Dr Hickman, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I'd just like to challenge Simon on the bringing automation reduces jobs. I've never been in a programme where automation has reduced jobs. It has reduced jobs in that particular application, but by putting a reskilling and upskilling programme alongside the automation, you actually increase the number of jobs in a company, you don't reduce them.
Thank you very much. The next question that I had stems from something that I think we were all struck by on the committee when we were doing our tour of the MTC, and we looked at a ventilator that was produced as part of the ventilator challenge. And when we were discussing the various components of it, it became very clear how reliant that ventilator was on labour and resources that come from overseas. Now, this has been a problem in manufacturing for many, many years. So the million-dollar question is, what do we need to do to reshore our manufacturing capability here in the UK? Is it just about tax breaks, or are there very specific policy directives that the government needs to put in place to encourage the investment in those areas? Starting with Dr Hickman.
I think that the first thing that we have to look at is productivity. And when we start to look at modern methods of manufacture and we bring in automation and we bring in digital manufacturing, we bring in lasers, we can increase productivity by an exponential rate. If we can then get that exponential growth in productivity into a product, you can manufacture that at a lower price point than you can in China or in any other overseas country. So by getting the right manufacturing processes in place and putting the investment into the manufacturing processes, we don't have to do tax breaks. We can bring things back to the UK. So an example of that we did recently, and I think it's I'm allowed to use the company name is Mclaren. So Mclaren were making the body shells for their vehicle in Austria. They came to the catapult centres, the MTC working with the AMRC and with the National Composite Centre, fully automated the manufacture of that body shell using carbon fibre. They reshored all of the production to Rotherham. So we know we can make it at lower price points if we get the productivity right. So if we put the investment into helping to improve productivity through things like the Made Smarter programme, I don't think tax breaks are things that are going to be important for that. We will be able to do it ourselves.
Thank you. Andy.
Two other things I'd add to this mix. The first, yet to see how it plays out, but I think it could be very significant, is the question of the new rules of origin, which obviously were negotiated in the, I call it the Brexit deal in shorthand. And our hope is that actually that will force industrial investment in the UK, because it will actually mean that a product has to have a higher percentage of domestic or European production within it. So I think, and I know that there are active discussions within big industrial companies in this region about the investments they will have to make to meet those requirements. So an interesting consequence. And the second piece I've just put on the table, and it's interesting, we haven't talked much about this in the last nearly an hour, and I think it's a critical component in this whole debate, is about the skills available, and particularly the higher level technical skills. And some of the most encouraging West Midlands startups that may be the unicorns of the future are frankly there because of the technical education that we've seen people going through. And I'm actually a great optimist around this, that there is a swing of the pendulum to actually focus on this, because that also is what will determine success. And you ask most people here what their current biggest issue is, it's employing sufficient people of the right technical capability.
Professor Collinson.
Well, just briefly, in the interest of time, I think there are two things here. One is we need to get much more precise at the regional level across the UK in terms of what are our real competitive advantages to attract particular kinds of foreign direct investment. Every region tends to say it's really good at everything. and that's a problem. And sometimes that's just marketing, and sometimes it's lack of intelligence. It's just a lack of analytical intelligence about what is the differentiator for a firm from China or India or the US to come to a particular place. We need to get better at that. Secondly, foreign direct investment is excellent because it's a net increase in investment. It's not displacing investment from other parts of the UK. And companies that invest abroad have higher productivity levels, and they have generally a higher R&D intensity than local firms, and create spillover effects that are usually very beneficial for supply chain firms and others within the region. So more FDI is good. Precise targeting of FDI and encouraging those spillover effects is part of the package.
Great. And then one very final question. The government is still focusing very much on 2.4%, 2.5% or so of our GDP being spent on R&D. Do you think that's enough, given that other leading industrial nations are spending up to 3%? And do you think we really need to be more ambitious? I'll start with Professor Collinson.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, that's a catch-up number, and it's been delayed again, unfortunately. And I think that's one issue, but the target needs to then be broken down, exactly as Clive has said, is what are the types of R&D? And I absolutely think we need to fund more of these intermediary bodies that help commercialise and translate R&D anywhere for regions or within regions for regions. That's critical.
It looks an ambitious target. You might have seen there are two lines. Oh my God. The first time. It's an ambitious target. You might have seen on the graph that I sent round, there are two lines. The intersection of the two lines is where the 2.4 would put us. And as you can see, there is no region of the country that is achieving that. And we are a very long way from it, as indeed everywhere outside London and the South East is as well. So it seems to me to be a stretching target from where we start. I do think the point, though, that the institutions that translate research, we believe, is the best way of moving that. He runs one of them. You've all talked about the admiration that you've got for it. We do not have those translational facilities in other sectors where we can lead.
And finally, Dr. Hickman.
I can't say much more than Simon has said. It's a good start. It's been delayed, and we need more.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. Just a final point, but first of all, it's not really my place to correct witnesses, but I don't want it to be conceded that the 2.4% has been delayed. In fact, it's been reasserted, and so I don't want to encourage anyone to think it's accepted that that's the case. The 22 billion of public investment has been put back a couple of years, but as far as we understand, the government retains its target of 2.4% of GDP. So I don't want them to be let off the hook on that. But my final question, just briefly, probably just to the Mayor, is actually building on something that Erin said. The 2.4% is public investment and private investment in R&D. And in the presentation of the budget, the Chancellor made what to many people was a surprising case that actually the level of public investment in R&D in the UK is higher than many countries, but the level of private investment is less. And so one of the big requirements over the next few years is to increase the level of private investment. And if we are to look at the performance of the West Midlands, even accepting that there are opportunities for more public investment, you are the region in the country that actually shows how you can get much more private investment made in R&D. So what does the West Midlands have that our inquiry can draw on to commend to the rest of the country? It's possible Andy just mentioned institutions such as the Manufacturing Technology Centre. Are there any other aspects that can be copied from the West Midlands and applied more generally, Mr. Mayor?
Nice question to finish with, Mr. Chair. I think call out three things. You are right to say the institutions. There's absolutely no question that if you look at the automotive sector, we have an incredible concentration of the institutions. So that's definitely right, and it's why my previous answer to Rebecca Long-Bailey was we need those in other sectors as well. The second thing we have, and I think this is a really important point, is a real deep concentration in certain sectors. It's both strength and weakness, but we are where we are on that graph because in terms of a proportion of UK R&D within certain high value advanced manufacturing sectors, we have a vast concentration, and we know that draws in other enterprises. So the theory of clusters is what lies behind that, actually. And the third piece that lies behind that is our universities are actually very, very focused on those areas as well. And I would actually say, have to with these two sitting here, but there's been incredible good collaboration between the universities and the private sector in driving that out. As Simon acknowledged earlier on, and given his employer is the University of Birmingham, it was a good thing to say, we perhaps have not been as successful in totality with our universities, but that positioning is because of focus in our universities.
Thank you very much. I'll let the two other witnesses add anything briefly if they want. No, in which case, can I thank very much our three witnesses, Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, Clive Hickman, the Chief Executive of the institution in which we have the privilege of sitting, and Professor Simon Collinson of the University of Birmingham. Thank you very much indeed for giving us a great start to our inquiry here in the West Midlands. We're going to say goodbye to our first three witnesses, and as seamlessly as we can, we are going to invite our next, in this case, pair of witnesses to join us. And I am very pleased to welcome two people in business, in technology businesses in the West Midlands region. I'm very pleased to welcome Tony Kinsella. Mr. Kinsella is the Chief Executive of Lucidian. I'll ask him to summarise the business in his own words rather than me give a potted version of it. And Stephen Malone. I am very pleased to welcome, who is the Chief Executive, the Group Chief Executive of the Malone Group. So perhaps, Mr. Kinsella, just tell us a bit about Lucidian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the invitation. So, Lucidian is actually formerly the British Ceramic Research Association, based in Stoke-on-Trent, so I'll repeat again, the centre of the universe for the UK. Its heart was in ceramics, very much the traditional ceramics of cups, saucers, plates, tiles and bricks, important products. We've repurposed that organisation in the last few years around advanced materials and advanced ceramics. So it's still one of those RTO type organisations, but a private organisation that intervenes and helps organisations take materials to the forefront of development.
Thank you very much indeed. And Mr. Malone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My journey is slightly different. I'm obviously not from this area. Malone Group began life in Dublin in 1999. We describe ourselves as a project delivery company, so we help companies with their capital investments. We have a UK office since 2011, and we're active in Canada and Bulgaria. Over the last number of years, we've been focusing on very much changing our business to take advantage of the opportunities we saw coming down the line in the area of the smart factory and emerging technologies.
Thank you very much indeed. And perhaps just to start from me, before I turn to Zara Sultana and then Aaron Bell. Mr. Kinsella, we're obviously the nature of our inquiry today is about the West Midlands and in particular, and what kind of a business environment that is. Tell us what it means to be in the part of the West Midlands that you are in Staffordshire, and how important is that is the place that you're in to the way that you conduct your business?
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's a good question. So, North Staffordshire, famous for, I said again, ceramics, but actually for transforming materials. If you look at its history, coal was at the base. So coal for the ceramics industry, for powering the coal to create steel, and then obviously clay to make the product. So it's had a 250-year history of transforming materials into higher value materials. It's also been at the head of innovation. If you think about Wedgwood, we talk about pottery, but he was an inventor. He invented different types of pottery, but he also invented things like pyrometry. So he was a scientist and a curious engineer, and a business person. He was involved in the canals. So very much that commercial and technocrat that I sort of thrive on. So there's the background. If you think about North Staffordshire, it's somewhat been an artisan type industry. So knowledge has been retained in the business and everyone has their own practice. It's been less of an engineering focus in many ways. The joy of the West Midlands connection is, of course, the West Midlands, as Andy Street and Co have just talked about, is a heart of engineering in the UK. So being able to engage with a broader range of engineering industries and try and turn an artisan-type industry into a more engineered product from the R&D and development side, but also into the application, understanding the needs better.
In terms of the ceramics industry, I mean, ceramics, people in their mind's eye, they picture pots and Wedgwood and all the rest of things, but actually its scientific applications are very important. In fact, we saw some during our tour of the Manufacturing Technology Centre. Is the a very traditional sector in Staffordshire? How is that making the transition to the new applications, or is it? Perhaps you'll tell me that actually its history has always been about applying the latest possibilities.
Yeah, it's only at the early stages of actually taking on the new materials. So it's really still been about making the products that it does very well. It's made those ever better. It's invested heavily in technologies to improve the products. But it hasn't yet seen the opportunities itself of the advanced ceramic materials. And I think partly that's because both the area, both local government and even government itself sees ceramics as pots and plates. And we've perhaps not advertised and marketed ourselves very well. If you think about where advanced ceramics are applied, party pieces, how many pieces of advanced ceramics in a mobile phone? 600 is the answer. So without advanced ceramics, maybe to our benefit, we wouldn't have these things. We wouldn't be flying. The engines that you sit and watch go around before they take off, they are absolutely dependent on thermal barrier coatings, which are highly advanced ceramics, without which the engines would melt. And I think we don't understand perhaps the societal impact of those sort of technologies. For healthcare, we're involved in ceramics in healthcare. There's a huge amount of our bodies now that can be replaced and supported by, again, ceramic materials. So I think perhaps there's an industry lacking in itself to bring out to the knowledge. We are one of the most advanced academic areas in the world in studying those materials, but the application of those are taken up in Japan, in Korea, and USA. So we've perhaps not seen the economic impact of here's three great, powerful regions, high-value technologies are exploited. We don't need to compete on price, but we export our academic expertise into the manufacturing and the development in those countries.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Malone, just on the regional aspect, are you obviously operate internationally, as you've said. Is there a particular rationale for the West Midlands connection? Does that contribute anything particular, or could you locate the business anywhere in the UK?
When we first invested in the UK 10 years ago, we were in the northwest, and that was because of two existing customers we worked for that were based here and there. We then acquired a company in Lichfield and another company in Manchester around the same time. And we conducted an analysis at that point of the northwest against the Midlands as areas to have our main base. Now, while we do have operations in the two locations, the decision was made to locate in the Midlands for a number of reasons. I suppose access to our customer base. We have a cluster in the northwest. We've a cluster around the Northamptonshire area. Access to talent. I would concur with what Tony has said around, being a centre of excellence. There are a lot of world-class engineering companies in this area, and that all led to the decision to base ourselves here.
Okay. Thank you very much. Go to Zara Sultana, and then Aaron Bell, and then Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to start with Tony, we've heard...
Need your mic, Zara.
It's not going to happen today. Tony, we heard in the previous session how the West Midlands was hit quite hard by the pandemic, especially sectors like manufacturing and tourism. What was the experience of the ceramics industry?
I guess I could say, sadly, a disaster area, very focused on hospitality, and therefore complete close down for most of that industry, while we didn't go out and eat, and airlines were closed and the like. So in the deep dark of 2020, things were pretty poor in the area. I think, though, there's been a good, strong recovery, which is great to see. Perhaps the rest of North Staffordshire, there is more of a diversity now in that area, so it's become a very strong logistics hub. So as we've all purchased from home and been into internet purchasing, another part of North Staffordshire has revived, but it's a transient industry. It's quick, it creates jobs, it gives the numbers, but it's a very transient industry, moving in and out as to where local government may support.
That demonstrates an industry that's able to adapt and evolve given the circumstances. Have you received any government support to help companies in North Staffordshire and the rest of the region?
Yeah, but we're perhaps one of those companies in North Staffordshire that Erin talked about, where we've been very successful around Innovate bids, and we just secured 18.3 million from the Strength in Places Fund, which is part of a £42 million project. So 18.3 from the government, the balance made up from ourselves and industry, and we constantly have about 5 or 6 Innovate programmes on. It's tough bidding for those programmes. I think the SIPF was a 4-year journey, so it needed resilience and persistence to get that through. And I think that may come back to some of the other questions as to why there are not enough applications for public funding. It's a tough old road, especially if you're an SME.
Just before coming to Stephen, what is it about those bids that you guys have made to Innovate UK that have been successful that the rest of the region can learn from, given how low public funding is?
Yeah, a mix of things, I think. I think one is beginning to learn the language. When you see the questions, people are trying to distill something out, so it takes some while to understand what's really being asked for. I think the right collaborations. When we started, our win rate was very low, and we focused on what we could do ourselves. The SIPF now is a collaboration called the Midlands Industrial Ceramics Group. That is actually led by Rolls-Royce. We've got JCB in there, we've got companies like Vesuvius, so, excuse me, that very strong industrial need is exemplified, not just stated in the document, but it's there because they're helping to lead the bid.
And Stephen, what has your experience been during the pandemic and as we are coming out of it somewhat?
Well, we were coming out of a very challenging 2019 on the back of Brexit. We operate in a capital world, so any sort of uncertainty gives companies a reason to pause investment, and we saw quite a lot of that at the end of 2019, and we were changing our business model at that point. We made large changes to our management team in the UK. When the pandemic hit and we all went back to our houses, our first instinct was how could we help? We have an R&D function that was quite young, that began in May 2019, and we got involved in 2 projects, and I suppose the ambition at that stage, or the objective, was to do our bit. We got involved with an emergency ventilator design with MIT. A version of that ventilator, not our one, but a version of it was used in the New York emergency at some point along the way, and we got involved in sanitizer manufacture, neither of which were commercially beneficial to the company, but as I said, it was just to contribute. Then towards the middle Q3 of last year, when things began to open up again, a trend began to appear, and we were doing quite a lot of 3D scans in manufacturing organisations at night. So where our customers didn't want people in, they didn't want contractors in, but they still needed to progress design. So we were going in out of hours, either in the evenings or at weekends, and we were carrying out 3D scans. And that allowed a lot of detailed design to take place, and projects continue. And in fact, the 3D models are so powerful, we're able to walk contractors through to get tender prices. So that has continued on and into this year, and I think that it's going to be a long time, if ever, where our customers are happy to have, large groups of external people come in. The other thing that has changed, and the previous panel alluded to this, is the adoption of smart factory technologies is something that has very, very definitely accelerated. And we have lots of companies talking to us now about where in the past it would have been a return on investment conversation, it's now a business continuity conversation. How do we use some smart factory technologies, and what's coming down the line to make our manufacturing facility more robust in the face of another pandemic possibly, or in the face of another occurrence. So we're having lots of conversations with companies around that. There is a challenge for them, because the smart factory world is so vast, and it covers such an array of technologies. It's a big bite to chunk off. So companies, come to us. They come to the AMTC when they generally have a problem to solve. They come to us when they need a roadmap, because everyone's end destination for a smart factory is different. And in a lot of cases, yes, we've heard about robots and we've heard about some of that technologies, but in a lot of cases it's about data. It's about getting data from your manufacturing facility, interrogating that, and understanding when those manufacturing facilities work best. And so when we go in, and we would typically have a package called Discovery 4.0 around that, which is essentially to go in, to observe what they're doing, to make recommendations, and to literally draw out the roadmap. And that roadmap has a cost to it. But that initial cost for companies is something that they often have a difficulty with. And I was listening with interest to some of the grants that I wasn't aware of in the previous panel. And it's certainly, if some support could be made available to those customers that would allow them to subsidise our costs, then that would be of great benefit. Yeah.
You mentioned that there are grants that you weren't aware of until now. Were you able to receive any government support over the past few years?
Well, over the last year, we availed of the furlough scheme. I was lobbying our local MP about the middle of last year to try to make it flexible, and I was delighted when that was agreed to, because it allowed us to restart from about July on. We haven't received any other grant aid, no, and that is something I would ask the committee to consider, because there's been a lot of talk about FDI and how to attract FDI in, but in other countries we operate in, SMEs are incentivised to grow. So if we grow as an SME in the UK, we're going to increase jobs, we're going to increase exports, and there are direct and indirect benefits from that. And to my knowledge, there's no organisation in the UK that's tasked with helping indigenous SMEs grow.
Thank you. Stephen, you mentioned the decision to move from the Northwest to the Midlands, and you mentioned location, the customer base, the talent, and the world-class engineering. Have you seen a trend where companies are moving to the West Midlands, and what can the West Midlands be doing to showcase some of those factors?
A couple of competitors have, so I don't think it should be doing anything at all.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. Hopefully more will move, and not necessarily competing with you, but more companies the better.
Well, I suppose on a serious note, the way we operate now, we have people remotely working in all locations. We invested very heavily in a system a number of years ago, and that has really paid dividends over the last year and a half. So we've people working who would never see offices on a routine basis at all, and that was coming in anyway pre-pandemic. And I think it's unlikely we'll ever get back to having people in 5 days a week again, because it's just, there are certain times in a project life cycle where you need people in a room sharing ideas, and then when that bit is done, it's just getting on with it.
Just on that, we've seen some companies trial 4-day working weeks. Is that something your organisation would consider?
I have been reading a little bit about that. We actually suggested a 4.5-day working week a number of years ago, and people didn't take it up. We work in a business where there can be unsociable hours when we're installing and commissioning, and so there has to be a lot of flexibility there anyway. So there's a lot of inbuilt flexibility in how we operate. I think it's one of our selling points as an SME against some bigger corporates. When we're all fighting for staff, and it's something I'd like to talk about later on. But I think that inherent flexibility has always been there.
And finally, to both of you, I'll start with Tony. Do you think that the planned uplift in public R&D spending is enough? And can you see which ways industry and organisations that you work with will benefit from it?
Yeah, I guess we all agree it's never enough, is it really? But I'm passionate about the split. I do think that there's something to be corrected in that split. I think it's critical as we go forward. There is more on D than R. We need the invention, but we need to develop it. We need to be back to that manufacturing industry that makes products. I think there's something more pertinent as well, though, underlying. I think our accountancy and our purchasing profession need to go back to school and understand costs and understand what a real value. Look at some of the things the government struggled with in terms of supply chain, PPE being made in China, we buy it in, but actually if it's made in the UK, you get rates, you get rent, you get VAT, you get employment taxes, yet our buyers just look at the purchase to price, and that's a failing of accounting industry and a failure of training in purchasing. So that's something I think government could help with. There needs to be a refocus of what's a beneficial purchase price that the NHS or any other government institution should buy.
Thank you. And Stephen?
Yeah, and just to follow on from that point, there's a phrase we're hearing quite a lot in recent months, just in case, as opposed to just in time. So what if something happens again? And I think every country in the world needs to challenge its supply chains. We can't all get everything from the same continent. Also, with companies now becoming more and more focused on ESG, it's also looking at the logistical cost of getting something from another part of the world, and adding that it isn't only the pounds and pence, it's the emission, it's the carbon footprint as well. So that's really important. In terms of the grant, yeah, absolutely. It's always nice to get more. We work we don't rely on grant aids so much, because a lot of the research project we would do on behalf of our customers. We do have some research ourselves that we've kicked off in the liquid air energy space that we will be looking for support on, and we will be looking to governments to support in the regions we operate on, and that's a decision for next year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Zara. Since we're talking about, at least in one case, North Staffordshire, I thought we should have one of our members from North Staffordshire as our Aaron Bell before Rebecca Long-Bailey.
That's very kind, Chair. Thank you. And thank you both for coming. If actually I could continue with Mr Malone on some of the general points first, because obviously you work with a lot of companies. We heard a lot in that first session about the West Midlands being an outlier in terms of the public to private ratio. What's your experience as to why that is the case in the West Midlands? And do you think it's partly related to what Tony was talking about, and then what you've already mentioned in your answer to Zara about bidding for things in the first place?
Well, our customer base is almost it is entirely private sector. No. So that's the space we work in. So I'm not sure I'm best positioned to answer that question.
But I mean, there is public sector money available for some of these businesses. Are they just not aware of it, not aware how to access it, not aware of what the MTC here does, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it isn't only our customers aren't aware of it. We're not really aware of it, because there's no one. it's unclear to me, having spent a decade working in the UK, where I can go and get that sort of information. We're aware of the AMTC, and we have been before now. There's an organisation in Ireland called Irish Manufacturing Research, IMR, which is an MTC equivalent, and there is a relationship between the two organisations. So some of my team have been in here and have had conversations about a couple of different projects. But yes, it would be great to be able to go into somebody and say, and talk about our Discovery 4.0 program and say, here's a way of getting a contribution, a tax credit, or some other form of assistance.
And the other general point I wanted to ask you about that came out of the first session was the point that all of the members of that panel made about the need for skills and talent and technical education and so on. What's your experience been about the ability of your companies that you consult for to access people with the right skills and the right talent?
I think this is a big challenge, and it is facing all of us who operate here. The problem, or the challenge I see, and this is I suppose a bit of a bugbear of mine. When I went into college in the 80s, engineering was seen as a profession of choice. The word engineer in the UK and in other regions in Europe isn't protected. Anyone can call themselves an engineer. If I compare with our colleagues in Canada, where an engineer is seen at the same level as a doctor, as a solicitor, we've lost that here, and it is becoming increasingly difficult to attract school leavers into the world of engineering. Because if you look at what engineers do, again to Tony's point, engineers have been involved in designing everything in the room, everything we use on a daily basis. But the designation of chartered engineer wouldn't be in the public mindset. And the reality is, we as a society would not accept somebody calling themselves a doctor who wasn't a doctor, or a solicitor who wasn't a solicitor. There is an urgent need, in my view, to protect the word engineer and to limit its use. And only that way are we going to get bright school leavers attracted into engineering. And I think this is such a serious problem for the industry that it needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency.
I mean, do you think the previous Education Secretary of Staffordshire MP put a lot of emphasis on further education? We're now bringing in T-levels. Do you sense that this is changing slightly? Or
no, I don't. No. You just have to listen to radio ads,
right,
where titles are made up with the word engineer at the end of it. It is not seen as a profession of choice anymore. Mm-hmm. And it was in my day. It was something to aspire to. If you read about a chief engineer, if you met a chief engineer, you were nearly in awe. It's just a throwaway term. It's a disposable term these days.
Thank you. If I turn to you, Tony, you were so close earlier when you described Stoke-on-Trent as the centre of the universe. We all know it's Newcastle-under-Lyme. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for all you do at Lucidian. If we could talk about some specific R&D projects. What were you working on before the pandemic struck? What were the most interesting, cutting-edge things that Lucidian was working on then?
Well, probably in the most cutting edge were towards aerospace, so looking at thermal barrier coatings, and CMC, so ceramic matrix composites, so you can make aero engines operate at ever higher temperatures, less emissions, more miles per gallon of kerosene. So that they were a fascinating but important area. And then the other one was on digitization, so computational materials development. We do an awful lot of experimentation, and you'll have seen some of that here at MTC, but actually starting to do that R&D in silicio, as it were, in computer, to actually reduce the R&D time. And I think that's a fascinating area when you can start to say, here's 8,000 potential combinations of a whole bunch of compounds. Run it on a supercomputer for a week and end up with 20 or 30 real candidates in 2 weeks, rather than 3 or 4 years of failed experimentation. So that's quite exciting, I think.
And what's the route to commercialisation for your company of these cutting-edge things that you're researching?
Yeah, engagement with industry and if you like, product managers. It's personal. You can do everything with the web that you want, but we are pack animals. materials as humans, aren't we? And in the end, you have to engage with humans. And the big thing, I had Kwasi Kwarteng up a couple of months ago, and commercial technocrats. We've got some great scientists, and they'll be the same here in MTC. They can talk science all day long, but to be able to translate that and put that in the mind of a business leader so that they can adopt it. So somehow, with all the good technical skills, we need to actually not be embarrassed and be excited to add that commercial aspect to our technocrats. Then we'll go out and actually take that technology from the lab and that excitement onto the factory floor.
And then during the pandemic, I understand your company stepped up in a couple of scientific areas to support the national response to the pandemic. Could you just talk us through those?
Yeah, we did. So here we are, talk about ceramics, but we were deeply involved with WOCA on the vaccine. So we did all the work on the buffer and the control medium. So that was a great program in terms of helping the nation and ourselves. So we were really pleased to be able to engage in that. So that was critical. And then again on the ventilators, some of the parts in there are made of ceramic. They were made outside the UK, so there had to be a programme using West Midlands firms to actually re-engineer those and make them here in the UK.
And how was your experience of were you asked to help? Did you stick your hand up to help? Did you get the right support from the government?
Yeah, I think all things are, and I think we stuck our hands up. I'm always nosy and pushy, so we offered to help. I think we were asked in a couple of areas, and we certainly got support. If I'm critical of one thing, I guess, support everything that was happened in the pandemic, but the blank message, stay at home and work from home. You can't have an engineering business with people sat at home. It doesn't work, and that message is still pervaded. It's almost in a business where you've got administration and other functions and R&D. You're creating two tribes: the work from homers and those who have to work in the lab or in the R&D facility. I think we have to be very careful what we talk about in there, because if we want this to be a great manufacturing nation, yes, we can automate, but you still have to have people in business around machines and machine tools. So that be careful what we wish for, I think, when we proselytise.
So where's your company got to now in terms of, is everyone back in the office?
We're all back at work. And I was on a session this morning, and I was fascinated to see out of 25 CEOs, I was the only one in the office. Everyone else is at home. And that's not about martyrdom, but I'm not sure that leadership is the great place to be from behind. It sounds like the First World War and the Somme to send people over the top rather than being there at the front. I think it's all about having the right procedures in your business so people are safe.
Fine. And finally, Tony, we're conducting a parallel inquiry into hydrogen, and I'm aware that you're looking at using hydrogen as a firing gas in ceramics. We obviously know that the ceramics, the steel industry, are suffering quite badly at the moment from the high energy prices. I think there was a PMQ about it yesterday from Holly Mumby-Croft. Could you tell us a little bit about that testing of hydrogen and what role you see hydrogen playing in the future of ceramics?
Yeah, I think we've invested in the equipment, so in a couple of weeks we'll have a kiln coming in that can take up to 20% hydrogen and then blend up to 100%. And we've got a great program now with High Deploy and Cadent to actually try that out. So we've got to look not only at functional performance of the product after it's fired with hydrogen, because you change the atmosphere in that kiln, the product does not bake the same. So you have to think about, will it still be as brittle? Will it be more brittle? Will it be as strong? You also have to think in the fashion side, will it develop the colour? So we're right at the front edge on that now. So there's a next investment to say, what does that look like on a larger scale for the big users of industry, the tile manufacturers and the brick manufacturers. They're very large volumes of gas in there, but we're deeply involved in understanding the impact, both economic and technical, on the product.
So it's still something of an experimental stage at the moment?
Yeah, it is. It's unknown. In many areas, you can actually work out the work energy of hydrogen versus natural gas. But at the atmosphere side, in terms of the furnace which made, that's still quite uncertain. So there's quite a lot of work to be done over the next 18 months to show that you can get the same product out for the same work energy in.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you very much. Just to elaborate a little bit more on that, Tony, one of the big concerns over the last few months for the ceramics industry have been energy prices and the fact that they're potentially going to get a lot worse over the winter months. What do you think the government should be doing to support the ceramics industry? And of course, it's not just the ceramics industry, it's the construction industry, cement manufacturing, anything that uses a high amount of energy.
Yeah, well, I guess we've all got a problem around the world, haven't we, in terms of energy prices. I think some of the industry has actually brought forward, so it has protected itself, and that's partly what we're bid to do as ourselves as industry leaders. I think part of the high deploy programme to say what other sources of energy can be used, I think that's critical. But also, if you look at some of the technologies, I think when Greg was Minister, we had an award to look at an exciting new technology in terms of sintering, which can actually sinter in 1 minute, what normally takes 40, and at, say, 30% less temperature. So there have been investment there, but there's got to be the other side, isn't it? The adoption. And when I talk about industry, sometimes we can be quite slow. I go around the world, and I said earlier, I talk to CEOs in the UK, and we get the, are we first, Tony? That quite timid, show me a lot of other people have been there for it. I go to America, and it's, are we first, buddy? Which means I want to be the first mover, and that's a cultural thing. I think we've got to get much more of that in industry, I think.
Yeah, definitely. One other question was, you've obviously got a footprint in many different regions across the UK. You understand what's happening in the various areas. Would you say that there was a vast difference between the types of support that are available in particular regions? And are there any specific regions you would say that were streets ahead of the rest that we should be trying to replicate across the UK?
No, from my experience, I think it's more about the local government and the local LEP and how engaged they are to help industry. I think that the support seems pretty much, I was going to say margarine, like that sounds disrespectful, but I think it's there. It's about engaging and helping people to be able to make best use of it. But there are areas where I think you need to get back to the clusters and actually invest so you can bring all that FDI through on that cluster base.
Okay. And Stephen, same question to you. Are there any things that you've picked up when you've been in different regions in the UK that you think would be good for the government to try and kind of roll out across the whole country?
Well, we look at it more on an industry basis, so we're in a position where we're able to take what we see in the pharmaceutical business, what we see in the food and beverage business, and cross-replicate that over different industries. One thing I would like to just pick up on what Tony said again, I can give an example where a British company is pioneering in a certain space at the moment. We have an agreement with a Canadian company for some carbon capture technology, and it takes carbon from fuel stacks and puts it through biophotoreactors and grows algae. So there's a major food company in England at the moment who's trialling one of these. It's in detailed design at the moment, and it really is pioneering technology because it is a circular process. It takes CO2 out of a stack, cleans it, sends O2 to the atmosphere, and then you have an outtake of algae that can be used as a superfood, that can be used for animal nutrition, and can be used for other applications as well. We're very excited about this. There was a lot of talk in the previous panel about new tech, which is absolutely great, but there also is a huge opportunity. We're here talking about a COVID recovery, and this is a huge opportunity for the UK government and for all governments to invest in. And I think what is going to be needed over the next few years is for governments to take a punt on some of this new technology that's out there, and to facilitate investment.
And is there anything that you've seen in the countries that you have a footprint in? I think you mentioned Canada and Belgium.
Bulgaria.
Are their governments doing anything specific beyond what the UK government is doing to support that R&D?
I mentioned earlier about other countries that would more proactively support SMEs, and that's one area that that I think could be looked at. I would think, you know, it's great to be invited to put forward my views on a panel like this. This hasn't happened in other countries, so I do greatly appreciate that. It's strange, you know, without naming names. You know, I mean, there have been some countries I've been in recently that you wouldn't think there is a crisis at all. But I think on the back of COP, there is such an opportunity. I remember being in Washington DC in 2019 at an investment conference, and it was such a relief at the time to get away from conversations about Brexit for a week. And I thought at that point, I said, everything is passing us by. We're so entrenched in this conversation. There is no room for any sort of conversation about anything else. And this is the opportunity. All of the commitments that have been made under COP now, this is the opportunity for governments who choose to run with it. And I certainly think on the carbon capture technology I've spoken about, there's a huge opportunity there.
And in terms of that green kind of industrial strategy, what are your thoughts on the government's net zero strategy? Do you think it's detailed enough? Would it spur on investment in the areas of project delivery that you're working on at the moment, or do you think there needs to be more put on the table? Certainly there have been widespread criticisms, for example, that there just isn't enough money put in there to meet the criteria that have been set.
I haven't seen very much meat on the bones in it, to be honest with you, Rebecca. But it all goes back to governments taking a chance and say, we are going to, if you're looking for proven technology in order to address all the problems we know are out there, we're going to be waiting a long time. Someone has to be the early adopter. And you know, the company we're working with is a company called Pond Technologies in Markham, Ontario. They have some really interesting tech around this. We're working with 2 projects at the moment, 2 pilot projects, one here and one in Calgary.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Tony?
Yeah, if I may. Just on net zero, I've been general management for 30 odd years, and I've seen all forms of greenwash come across from industry. I have never ever seen and so much real industrial leaders actually being passionate about climate change. It's been a marked and fascinating change, and so I think government funding, yes, is important, but actually getting people truly involved in the mission for more than greenwash. A COO of one of the major ceramics companies used to tell me, "Oh, forget energy, Tony. We just put the price up." That was his response to climate change. Now they're saying, only talk to me about sustainability. Nothing else, just about sustainability. And that to me is it's the lever against the government fund, isn't it, that needs to pull through.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca. And finally to Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, I didn't press it. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Stephen, I want to just ask you a couple of questions. Firstly, can I say thank you for the comments you made about engineering? I've shouted about this on many an occasion. You know, an engineer in our speak can be anything from someone that fixes your telly to tinkering about in your car, and they're always definitely male. So I have a huge issue with our kind of image of what an engineer is, and I think, yeah, we have to do a lot of work on that, so thank you for that.
I would agree. I think getting young ladies into STEM has to be a priority.
Absolutely. But I wanted to, I mean, it was interesting to hear your comments about funding and saying that you had found out today about areas of funding you could tap into. We had the tour this morning, and one of the things we heard was that Innovate funding, or Innovate funds from UK government can't be used for advertising. So we're relying on what we heard in the previous panel, for example, a bank suggesting that companies go and talk to something like the MTC. Would you like to see more advertising or promotion of, for example, schemes like this? And how do you think that would be best done?
I would essentially like to see a body who is tasked with helping SMEs grow and provide support around that. That doesn't always need to be financial support. That can be advice and guidance. But we have applied for an Innovate grant on behalf of a customer. I believe that's pending. It's in the vertical farming space. But yes, just for, I suppose, a lot of the talk has been around manufacturing industry and supports around manufacturing industry and making them more future-proofed. In the service sector, it's a different proposition.
So I wasn't thinking so much of the Innovate funding you have, but I was thinking more of, for example, the Innovate funding that AMTC has, and not necessarily should they be able to use that for advertising, but should there be more promotion of these kind of collaborations between something like MTC and small businesses? Should there be something that would alert you? Maybe that's exactly what you're talking about.
In terms of advertising, yes, it's a different way of doing it. I think, just going back to another country we operate in, that model works well, where there is an organisation tasked with supporting SMEs.
Where is that?
Ireland.
Ireland. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. Can I thank Stephen Malone and Tony Kinsella for giving us the benefit of your practical experience. We've talked a lot in the first session about future developments, future discoveries. One of the things that came strongly out of that was the need to apply not just breakthroughs, but actually the current levels of technology and to disseminate that. And it's very good to hear from you about your experience and your thoughts as to how that might be done a bit better. So thank you very much indeed for coming to the MTC to appear before us today. I'm going to invite our next and final panel of witnesses to come to the table.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And while they are joining us, I will introduce them. So I'm delighted to welcome Professor Martin Freer. Professor Freer is a nuclear physicist by background, but particularly for our discussion today is Director of the Energy Research Accelerator and also Director of the Birmingham Energy Institute at the University of Birmingham. And Professor Daniel Smith. Professor Smith is the Executive Director for Global Cell and Gene Therapy at Cobra Biologics and is Honorary Professor at both the University of Kent and more particularly for our purposes the University of Warwick and has a PhD in molecular cell biology back earlier in his career. Perhaps I could start with Professor Freer first. Obviously, one of the themes of our discussions today has been to look at the strengths, the opportunities, but also some of the things that have held the West Midlands back according to its potential. You're involved in an area of work that has national implications, but you're very much rooted in the West Midlands. So tell us about the experience of that, and perhaps in so doing, just describe a bit about the work of the Energy Research Accelerator.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to join you here today. So the Energy Research Accelerator is not just focused in the West Midlands. It brings together 8 universities across the whole of the Midlands. And it's collectively it's about 1,500 people working on energy R&D. And it works with all sorts of organisations, and British Geological Survey is part of our community, part of our membership. We have worked with the West Midlands Combined Authority, we have worked with the Midlands Engine, so we work at a political level, but primarily our job is to try and accelerate energy technologies in the broadest sense, reaching out into sustainability and transport into market as fast as we can go. And so it's working with large businesses, so OEMs, multinationals, all the way down to small businesses. So our program has supported about 1,000 SMEs across the region in developing their own technologies. Originally funded through government, £60 million worth of government funding, which leveraged about £110 million of industry funding, and indeed overall delivered in 5 years a programme about £450 million of activity back into the West Midlands and East Midlands region by attracting in other investment. So I would say a successful programme which at the moment is driving a number of initiatives. One of them is around how we deliver hydrogen freight and logistics across the Midlands. So how is it that we can get 44-tonne hydrogen trucks on the roads? How is it that we can take advantage of the fact that the Midlands has some industrial strengths, so around heating, energy, and recognising that some of the national challenges that we have, particularly around decarbonising heat, that we have many of the assets that we have need in the region to drive this sector forward. So we are proposing at the moment a National Centre for Decarbonisation of Heat, which would be anchored in the Midlands.
Just say a bit about the word accelerator. What to the layman, what does that mean?
So, accelerate in terms of timescale is what it means. Is you think about development of energy technologies from inception. So let's take the university as a microcosm of that. So you've got academics who are developing new ways of doing things, driving innovation. And then you've got to go from early stage funding, which is typically coming through research councils like EPSRC, through to the point where you're scaling up, to the point where you're demonstrating, and then you're developing the manufacturing processes around technology so that you can bring them through into market. So our acceleration programme embeds facilities in universities. It takes them through to environments like, I think you heard about Tynesy Energy Park earlier on. Tynesy Energy Park is one of the 5 energy innovation zones that we've created across the West Midlands to hothouse innovation. So that's a real industrial setting where one is scaling up that technology and embedding it into an energy system. And then the AMTC themselves have played a very significant role in the manufacturing side of things. So I'm going to guess you saw the factory in the box as you went around. So that was £10 million programme that the Energy Research Accelerator funded. And that was so that we, as companies are developing their technologies, we have state-of-the-art manufacturing that we can offer them. Through a range of, not just a factory in a box, but through a range of programmes that the MTC deliver. And the art is, of course, bringing a whole set of organisations together. You've got the Energy Systems Catapult in the region, you've got the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, you've got the universities. The art is to get all of these organisations working, ideally, in a seamless way where you can, so often innovation is lost in the gaps. And the idea of the Energy Research Accelerator is there are no gaps. You are hand-holding the technology development all the way through into market.
Thank you. And as you point out, the Energy Research Accelerator is across the Midlands. But why the Midlands? Is it just coincidence? Is there any particular reason that it should be in the Midlands, or could it be in the North East or the South West, for that matter?
Well, if you look at the energy sector itself, about a third of the jobs associated with the energy sector in the Midlands. We have companies like National Grid. We have companies, if you think about the heat sector, Worcester Bosch, Baxi, we've got Valent, so many of the manufacturing companies that are important in that sector. And if you also think about where historically we got energy from, it was big coal power stations, and a heck of a lot of them sat across the Midlands. And we are going through a transition now, so not so far away from where Aaron is. There is a coal power station, Rugeley, which is going through a transition with investment from a very significant company, NG, Equans. And that if you look in the East Midlands, there's a whole series of sites there which also need to go through a transition. So we've got actually a lot of the expertise, a lot of the investment has come into this region. About 5 billion per year goes into the regional economy from the energy sector. It's very significant.
Thank you. Well, there is an interesting kind of feature of that clearly what you've said, the implication is that the accelerator has followed the footprint of an industry here, and we've essentially found the same from ceramics in the previous session, and indeed the Warwick Manufacturing Group had its origins in automotive, and which is an interesting model as to how supportive research institutions might develop. Perhaps I could turn, before turning to my colleagues, to Professor Smith and just ask you to describe a bit about the work of Cobra Biologics and the role of the West Midlands in your business.
Okay, yes. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here today. So Cobra Biologics is a small company based on the Keele University Science Park. It's been established for about 20 plus years there. It was established originally by people that work for AstraZeneca in the northwest, in the Macclesfield site and the Audley Park site there, that wanted to do more biological type work around medicines manufacturing than AstraZeneca wanted to do at that time. So they spun out a company, set it up at Keele, and it's grown from that point onwards, actually. So what is Cobra today? Cobra is a contract development and manufacturing organisation that makes early phase clinical trial material to support innovative medicines. So we work primarily in the areas of cell and gene therapy. We make the medicines that are coming from our customers that are trying to get into first-in-man studies. So we're highly regulated. We're inspected by the MHRA. We have every 2 years licence reviews to make sure that our manufacturing facilities are up to scratch and our quality systems are up to scratch and everything like that. And then, fundamentally, why the West Midlands? I think really, it was close location to where people lived when they span out of the original sites, but it actually started as a therapeutic development company, and they acquired some technology from Birmingham University. So again, there was a link to the West Midlands at that point there. So I think, I hear a lot about why the West Midlands, and we're talking about the West Midlands today. I think it's an interesting one in our sector because I see the UK as a cluster. I don't see different parts of the UK being separate. In our organisation, in our sector, we have to work very, very collaboratively with lots of different organisations, be that academia, other businesses, government and things like that. So actually, being in the centre of the country is really helpful from a location point of view, a transport point of view, but fundamentally, it could be anywhere. But I think, why the West Midlands? Historically there, the skill base around the West Midlands is also very important. In the fact that, within geographical location to where we are some of the really strong universities that support the skills that we require within our business. We have Warwick, we have Birmingham, we have Aston, and then further north we've got Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Sheffield, all able to come in and work in that really confined area of what we want to do.
Thank you. And just before I turn to my colleagues, starting with Aaron Bell, then Carol Monaghan, I suppose to kind of turn the question around the other way. We had the opening, I think it was yesterday, of the AstraZeneca headquarters research building in Cambridge. There has been, in life sciences generally, a bit of a kind of clustering effect in places like Cambridge and I suppose in London. So have you felt a kind of gravitational pull that you've resisted to join that? Are you exceptional to what we might hear about?
I don't think we're exceptional. I think I don't actually think you have to be as clustered as that to do what we do. I think you have to be able to work collaboratively, and you can do that down the road with someone, or you can do that at the other end of the country with someone. So no.
Very good. And I mean, you described the UK as being a relevant sort of cluster in that. Aaron Bell, then Carol Monaghan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks both of you for coming. If I continue with Professor Smith, we've talked about the West Midlands. Perhaps you could give a little bit about what the specific advantages of Kiel, the Science and Innovation Park, are for your company, and again, whether you've been able to get the necessary skills, or whether it's the logistical, the fact that Staffordshire is so well located in terms of the logistical connections around the country. Why Kiel, and the Innovation Park has grown so much in the time you've been there. You were one of the first tenants. Could you just talk a little bit about that as well?
Yes. I mean, Kiel have been a very good landlord and very good host for our company. We started off taking a little bit of space in one of their existing buildings. Half the building was a telephone exchange and a library, and the other half was some research labs that we started off working in. And then slowly we've been able to grow the business and take over the whole of that building. And then about 5 years ago now, we needed to expand even further. Kiel are very, very ambitious in the way they build their innovation centres and allow companies in and access space there as well. So it was a very natural fit to expand and continue to expand in the same location, take more space on the campus and things. And I think, to answer your question on skills, Aaron, the workforce around Kiel are very, very loyal. They're great people to work with. We have multiple people in our company, so there's about 120 on the site. I would say 30 plus of those have been there 15, 20 years. So they really stay. They're really loyal. You train people really well, and they stay. They love coming into work. And I think, we'll probably touch on the pandemic later on this, but one of my real pleasures, I guess, with the pandemic was the fact that we were able to do what we did. No one was put on furlough. People worked at home. People came in. But, even that loyalty for people that have administration jobs, being at home would ring me up at home and be really grateful that they worked for a company that was able to do something to respond to the pandemic. So I think that's loyalty, really, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to ask you next, actually, because you didn't really cover it before, and I'm aware that what you did with the vaccine wasn't actually your core business, but you reacted very quickly. So perhaps you could talk us a little bit through your role in the AstraZeneca vaccine. In fact, you were involved with it before it was even the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So it's interesting. I've just come from a conference, actually, where we've been talking about this. So, I was contacted on the 23rd of February by a person called Dr. Sandy Douglas from the University of Oxford at the Jenner Institute. And he rang me up. He said, I've been given your name because I believe that maybe your company has the skills that can help us scale up our vaccine from where it is in the lab and help us make the first doses to put into phase 3 trials for patients. And I said, maybe, we might be able to do that. And then from that day on the 23rd of February all the way through, and it took 109 days from that point to work with Oxford, to work with Paul Life Sciences based in Portsmouth, to work with Symbiosis, which is a fill-finish company based in Stirling in Scotland, to be able to go from that point, scale it from a 3-litre scale reactor, as it was then, up to a 200-litre scale reactor in 109 days, make it, test it, and get it out for clinical trials, was a phenomenal effort, actually. So, yes, we were in before AstraZeneca joined. So we were working directly with the University of Oxford and their scale-up team there. And then as AstraZeneca came in, it transitioned from Oxford to AZ, and then we continued to work with AZ and then helped. Actually, I was seconded into the University of Oxford team to support the transfer of the process, not only into the Kiel facility, but also into the Oxford Biomedica facility in the UK and to the Helix facility in Leiden as well. So, yeah, everyone's put their hands up and sort of stepped in to do that. And I think that's another really important point. We've heard a lot today about the manufacturing that goes on here. The life science sector that we work on, it is a great place to work. It's phenomenal. What motivates me every morning is that I can go to work and what I do can fundamentally change the lives of patients. And everyone, I think, at Kiel believes that. Everyone at Cobra believes that they're contributing to future medicines and potentially life-saving medicines and life-changing cures for people as well.
Yeah. Well, firstly to say I think we're all incredibly grateful for the work that you did, and I was very grateful. In fact, you gave me a tour, I think 1st of April maybe in 2020, and I was staggered by how far you'd come so quickly. What lessons has your business learned from that experience, and how will that support your growth in the future, and how will that support the region's recovery from COVID?
So I think it's a really interesting concept there. So why were we able to do what we did as an organisation and as a consortia as quickly as we did? And it came down to the fact that there was a common purpose. Everyone had a common purpose to do this. But there was collaboration, absolute trust and collaboration between the partners that came together to do this. And I think the learning from this, Aaron, is the fact that how do we work collaboratively with competitors, with some suppliers, with government, with academia, with the regulator, the MHRA, to move medicines quickly through to patients. It's not in a pandemic situation, which we all know we need it as quickly as possible, but how do we make that the normal way of business? And I think it comes down to communication, and also, you know, we're a highly regulated industry, and there's a lot of checks and balances, rightly so, for medicines development. But you can innovate and challenge people's perceptions slightly on how to do those business processes without cutting any corners, but still ensuring patient safety and medicine safety as well. So for me, that's what it's been about, really.
And just in terms of the future growth of the business and recruiting people, has this made it, you know, the role of the pandemic, both for you and the whole life sciences sector, has this made it a more attractive place for people to work? Are you finding it easy to fill vacancies now that you've had this starring role?
So we continue to recruit through the time as well. We had to take on more people rapidly, train people rapidly, and do things. It's actually quite an interesting one now, because people have come through Cobra and be highly trained and they've got that skill set. Their currency to move to other jobs is very high at the moment. So actually, we're having a bit of a challenge on recruitment. But then I was talking to a number of other people in the sector, and recruitment is a massive challenge for the whole of the life science sector at the moment. You know, the amount of medicines coming through the pipeline, the amount of clinical trials that goes on, phase 1 studies progressing through to late phase and commercial manufacturing, means that we absolutely need to train, recruit and attract more people throughout the UK infrastructure to support the industry. So it's tough at the moment.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I better turn to Martin. Nice to see you again, Professor Freer. In our first panel, we spoke a lot about how the West Midlands has the highest ratio of private to public investment in R&D, and you're obviously one of the people who managed to get some public investment and leverage that into private investment. Tell us how you did that, and tell us what lessons you've learned and what future public investment you might want. You'll need to put your mic on.
Thank you. So how did we do it? So I think it came at a time, and we might be at that time again, but it came at a time a few years ago when the universities in the Midlands recognised that actually a lot of the leveraging investment was going to other parts of the country, in particular the Golden Triangle. And it was the vice-chancellors of the universities within the region that decided that there was a strategic opportunity to argue for investment, leveraging investment into the universities, which then would be able to drive economic growth in the region. And so it was, at the time, a strategic investment through government, through Innovate UK, through into the region, which I think was a bit of a national experiment in some ways. Nothing like this had been done before, where you're harnessing the innovation strength within universities, the collaborative power that they have with industry. So as a group of universities work very strongly with industry and recognising that industry would co-invest. And as I say, I think there's been not just a measure, a very significant level of success that we've had in creating new initiatives. So not too far away from here, we have the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre, UK BIC, that was catalysed by the investment that we made collaboratively with Jaguar Land Rover into battery manufacturing facilities. We came up with this concept of energy innovation zones within the West Midlands. Rugeley is an energy innovation zone. We've got 5 energy innovation zones within the region. Highsley Energy Park is another, but Coventry, the Arden Cross development around Birmingham and the Birmingham International Airport is another. So there's been a whole, and Black Country indeed is another energy innovation zone. So I think we have taken the region, West Midlands is the focus here, on quite a significant journey in terms of investment. But these are strategic initiatives. You don't unlock £60 million worth of funding through writing applications to research councils. And if one wants to take advantage of the kind of collaborative spirit that industry, universities have, political organisations have in the region, they need to be supported in a strategic way.
Thank you. You just explained some of the work you've already done. In terms of going forward, has anything about the pandemic changed what you're looking at, or is it mostly stuff that we needed doing anyway? And to what extent do you think the projects that you've got will be self-sustaining commercially, or is it going to require continual public support from the ERA?
Yeah, so the pandemic has, of course, has created a lot of thought and consideration. Of course, it presents opportunity, and as you've got a region like the Midlands, in particular the West Midlands, which is thinking about how does it reconfigure itself from an industrial perspective. Of course, the impact on the automotive sector has been significant. So there are opportunities recognising the industrial base that we have. So yes, around the automotive sector and transport, how do you reconfigure that for net zero? And hydrogen transport may be one of that, one of those opportunities. But as I was saying, big sector in the future is going to be heat, low carbon heat. And if you look at the manufacturing base that we have, if you look at the companies, didn't mention E.ON as a big energy company in the region, actually that we have all of the assets to start a new industrial sector within the region, which creates investment, international investment, creates new opportunities for skills, jobs, badly needed within the region. What was your second?
So I was going to say, I asked whether you thought that some of this stuff would be commercially viable without the ERA.
Yeah, so and we have a number of activities which have spawned commercial ventures. So we have developed technologies. So a big challenge that we have around the energy system at the moment is energy storage. Company that we've helped support develop, and in fact the original technology idea came from our partnership is Highview. Highview, very large energy storage technology which is doing very well internationally. We've commercialized technologies within China. So within China we have installed with an industry partner 1.5 gigawatt hours of energy storage technology. That is the size of a nuclear power station. So we are commercializing technologies. So this is not fundamentally an R&D program. The acceleration bit is with industry partners, how can we get this out into being product in market? And we've also set up a business incubator. So we are drawing businesses into our ecosystem so that they can work and accelerate their own development of technology, work in partnership with the academic expertise, use our facilities.
And just finally, our first panel, and Andy Street in particular, were explicit about the need to diversify our R&D across the area, but because of the auto-industrial base Hugo spoke about. Was the ERA conceived as the deliberate act of diversification, and are there other areas, the Midlands, the West Midlands specifically, but the Midlands generally, ought to be trying to diversify our R&D efforts into?
Yeah, so I think when it was established, it was recognising the pinnacle of academic strength that we have in terms of energy across the university partnership. It was recognising also that industrial strength, and that actually by investing you could catalyse those communities to work together. And I think that's what's happened. As we go forward and you look across the universities and actually emergent technologies. So my other role is that I'm Vice President for Science and Innovation within the Institute of Physics. So I come from the Physics Department at the University of Birmingham. One sees emerging quantum technology And we have within our region an institute which is developing quantum sensors. This is clearly a big opportunity for UK PLC to develop a technology area, and one could see clustering businesses around these centres of excellence that we do have in the region. So quantum would be one example.
And just finally on that then, I presume you're relatively excited about the prospect of ARIA and the potential for projects that could bid into ARIA.
Yeah, well, I think we're all waiting to find out what ARIA is, but it certainly looks like a great opportunity to shape. So if it genuinely does turn out to be blue skies thinking, an acceleration of blue skies thinking into emergent sectors, there are a number of areas that one could think might do well within ARIA. I mean, I'm not sure which direction it's going, but I mean certainly there are exciting things in the energy sector, but certainly in the physics portfolio, there's things like metamaterials, which might be the next cab off the rank, which follows quantum technology. So there are some really exciting things which one could see fitting into that portfolio. But from a personal level, I'm still waiting to hear what on earth ARIA is.
Thank you both very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. I wonder if you could, both of you, we'll maybe start with Professor Smith, but if you could maybe give us examples of projects or products that your organisation is developing just now that might help the UK and the region, indeed, the recovery from COVID.
Certainly. So like I said, we're a contract development and manufacturing organisation. So fundamentally, customers come to us to be able to make their medicines. So we have to continually innovate and develop processes for those types of medicines to be able to make them both at the right quantity and at the right quality. So we spend a lot of internal R&D thinking about how do we make our processes more productive, quicker, and at lower cost. How do we reduce the cost of goods within the process? And we can do quite a lot internally, but we work very collaboratively as well through various grant type approaches. So we use Innovate UK funding for collaborative R&D grants. We work on the knowledge transfer partnership as well with academia to be able to translate interesting technology directly from an academic setting into the company setting. And we also then do what I would say is more sort of the blue skies type research by supporting case studentships for doctoral training as well within academia in order to really understand the underpinning biology or the underpinning biochemical engineering needs in order to improve our processes. So really everything's focused around productivity enhancement without just going bigger and bigger. So how do you make more from the same footprint? And then how do we reduce the cost and increase the speed to be able to do things? So there are a number of projects with different universities throughout the UK, but also abroad as well.
Is there opportunity within that? I mean, obviously we've seen over the last 18 months the need to be able to manufacture drugs and medicines here in the UK. Is there opportunity to exploit that further rather than the situation we have at the moment?
Absolutely, there definitely should be. So we have a fantastic ecosystem within the UK of academia and small companies developing novel medicines. We have a bit of a challenge on the translation of those medicines from a preclinical to a clinical setting at the moment. The government, through Innovate UK and the research councils like the MRC and LifeArc, have started to help close that gap by funding viral vector translation centres and the hubs that they've set up. They've put a lot of effort into collaborative R&D funding. Is it enough? No, we need to keep going. We need to push harder on it. We need to really bring the engineering and that biochemical engineering skill sets and need to bear that we have in the UK to make processes better. So there's there is a great ecosystem around funding and grants. Is it enough? It's never enough. We've got to keep going with that.
So if you had additional funding then, what would you use it to do?
So I would use it, I think companies in our sector and our company specifically would use it for innovation type R&D, collaborative R&D in order to drive better processes. But we would also use, I guess, the innovation is another way of looking at it, but we'd also use, if there were capital grants as well, to build smarter facilities to do
so
things
scaling
better
up as well.
Scaling up, scaling out, or it doesn't even have to get bigger, it just has to get smarter at the way it delivers the medicines as well. And, you know, the government have put funding in on capital grants as well. We've received a capital grant from the government prior to the pandemic that allowed us to increase our capacity at the Kiel facility, which actually was absolutely beneficial for making the AZ vaccine. We wouldn't have been able to do the vaccine unless the government had helped us increase that capacity just prior to the pandemic, actually. But again, I think it's making sure that, you know, a lot has gone into the sector. Is it enough yet? No, it's got to keep going. We need to be able to then sort of move the dial a little bit. So we've gone from early stage academic, translated through to clinical first-in-man studies. The bit that really adds value then is how do we retain the commercial manufacturing of medicines within the UK. Currently, a lot of it goes abroad because it's cheaper and easier to do it abroad. But once you've sent it out, you never get it back. So it's really making sure that the UK captures that manufacturing stickiness, as I refer to it, and lock it down within the UK.
I mean, we heard from one of the previous witnesses about, it might actually have been this morning, we heard about smart purchasing that had economic benefits for the whole area. Do you think we should be thinking more about smart investment as well that will bring about further economic benefits rather than just what's immediately obvious?
I think that's absolutely right. I think we have to think in that way. We have to think creative about what we have. I mean, it came up earlier in one of the earlier panel actually talking about resilience in the supply chain as well. You know, we are absolutely beholden to a global supply chain for making medicines. Currently, when we were making the AstraZeneca vaccine, we were able to access that global supply chain because everyone was supporting pandemic response. People are still supporting pandemic response. We're no longer making the AstraZeneca vaccine at our scale. We can't get the bags we need, the tubing sets we need. So medicines, the other medicines are moving backwards now. So we have to think smarter about, I don't think it's right to just onshore everything into the UK. We've got to really think about what are the pinch points globally and then try and set up solutions to those onshore.
Thank you. And Professor Freer, if I can come to you, and good to see you, and good to hear you talking about quantum possibilities, and I know the University of Birmingham is particularly strong in this. Can I ask you about products or projects that you're working on that are going to aid the area's COVID recovery?
So I hope what you've, so if I stick with the energy side of things for a moment. So I hope what you see is what we do is we create an ecosystem. We kind of draw people in by networking, creating partnerships, etc. My colleagues from the Institute of Physics and a bit of work that we've done as part of my portfolio, and this is, I've kind of done a survey. I've got to switch for a second and then I'll come back to energy. But I've done a survey of physics-orientated businesses. And the things which emerged that impacted them through COVID were things like, well, it's all pretty obvious. And I think you've said some of these. But, I mean, it's the demand from clients, disruption to supply chain and equipment, access to equipment. But for companies that are innovating, it's that ecosystem, it's access to facilities that universities might be able to provide access to those businesses, and the acceleration that causes or creates by being able to work in partnership with experts. And that's really what we do. And we've been working with those 1,000 businesses across the region. It has been to try and accelerate their technology journey. And COVID has really impacted very significantly on that. Access to facilities, no, we couldn't do that. Access to expertise has been difficult, and we're coming out of the back end of that now. The way that universities work, or at least fund their work with businesses, is through ERDF. And across the region, there's about £50 million of support which goes into regional institutions, universities, which have funded that direct business engagement. You will know that we've come to the end of that ERDF programme. You will also know we don't quite know what is sitting next in terms of ways of funding access to business to those kinds of facilities that we have within universities. There is a real danger that actually all of the capability that has been created in supporting businesses and the expertise, that will evaporate if there is not a seamless transition to support programs in the future. And also the way these programs are set up are often with targets. And we're just in a slightly perverse position at the moment that we cannot, within a certain part of the region, support businesses anymore on our programs because we've hit our targets, and that we're told by the funder that, sorry, you've hit your targets, you need now to deploy your programs elsewhere, even though business is still queuing up to work with us. So how you structure programs is very important as well.
So let me get this straight. You have funding, but you're only allowed to help a certain amount with that?
Yeah, we have programs which have targets across all of the region. We've in part of our region, we've hit our target. The demand has been colossal. But could you give me an example? What do you mean by that target? So we are allowed to support so many businesses. So it's not how much money we've got to spend. You can work and support, let's call it 100 businesses within a particular LEP region. Once you've hit that target, then that's you need to move on and support other businesses. So one needs, it's obvious, isn't it? One needs a bit more flexibility in how you deploy these programs so that you don't run into these kinds of issues where you're having to turn businesses away.
Have you raised these issues with BASE?
Well, raised, so ERDF is funded through whatever the department is called now. Okay. So it has been raised with the ministry, but not with BASE.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Carol. Well, that brings us to the end of our session here at the MTC. I'd like to thank our two professors for ending our panel. We've covered a huge amount of ground, from looking at the impact of the pandemic to the more long-standing differences in the contribution of private sector versus public sector investment in research and development, what might be the reasons for that and what might be done about it, to having a deeper dive into some particular examples of how innovation and technology is practiced. Very grateful to all of our witnesses for helping us with our inquiry, and in particular to the Manufacturing Technology Centre for being very generous in hosting us today. That concludes the session of the committee. Order, order.